Good afternoon and welcome to today's BATIC Institute webinar featuring a discussion of opportunities and challenges around bundling small-scale projects into public-private partnerships. My name is Jennifer Brickett. I'm with the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials and the director of the BATIC Institute and AASHTO Center for Excellence. Today's webinar will be approximately 1 hour in length. We'll have about 40 minutes of presentation followed by a live Q&A with today's speakers. Before getting started, I'd like to review a few logistics. You should have received an email with a link to the PowerPoint presentation. If you didn't receive this email, please visit the BATIC Institute website at financingtransportation.org. A copy of the PowerPoint is available there for download. Everyone will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. At any time, please submit a question in the Q&A box at the bottom of the GoToWebinar control panel for the live Q&A session that will take place at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website by the end of tomorrow. As background, the BATIC Institute is an educational center that helps state departments of transportation and their local agency partners analyze, understand, and use project finance techniques to advance transportation projects. We build this capacity through a program of training, sharing of best practices, and online educational services like this webinar. The BATIC Institute is delivered in partnership with the U.S. Department of Transportation. For more information about the Institute, please visit our website. The goal of today's webinar is to help you better understand innovative and accessible ways that transportation agencies can partner with the private sector on smaller scale projects by bundling assets and standardizing procurements. This webinar will look beyond the traditional example of a toll road P3 and explain different strategies for utilizing private sector expertise and financing to deliver new capital investments. Today we will hear about Michigan DOT's innovative freeway lighting project, Pennsylvania DOT's CNG Fueling Station project, and Washington State DOT's electric vehicle charging station project. All three states will participate in the live Q&A at the end of the webinar. Anthony Buckley, Director of the Innovative Partnerships Office with the Washington State DOT, will give us a snapshot of how one state, Washington State, is approaching P3 opportunities. After all of the presentations, Anthony will also identify some common themes heard throughout the presentations. And with that, I hand it over to Anthony Buckley.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. So again, I'm Anthony Buckley with Washington State DOT, and I think to start this out from my perspective, it's important for me to let you know with public-private partnerships what my feel or thoughts are. I would tell you up front, I am agnostic as to the use of a P3. P3s do serve a purpose. I think that I'm more an advocate for value and efficiency and the consideration of a public-private partnership as you look to finance or deliver your infrastructure projects. So, not starting out with a downer of a statement, let's talk about why you should consider a P3. P3s can maximize the value and use of transportation owner-managed properties. A P3 could advance important public policy, such as mitigation of existing environmental impacts. Used properly, your P3 could leverage current government investments and funding with outside sources of capital or facility improvements. And this could result in more value earned for the public. A public-private partnership could offer opportunities for technological advancements. They could generate new sources of revenue for transportation projects. And a public-private partnership could seek to realign or align the traditional contracting roles and project risks in ways that can reduce overall project costs. Next slide, please. So, again, I'm with Washington State, and I would tell you here in Washington State, we've had a long history of analyzing how a P3, a public-private partnership, could be instituted on some of our large-scale projects and in some small projects. It's been about a 25 to 30-year conversation. Our DOT is somewhat unique, and there are a couple others throughout the country. We are unique in our asset base. We are proud to say we operate the largest ferry system in North America. So that presents us with a unique set of assets with ferry terminals and actual vessels. And then we have, just about all of you do, a number of parking rides, and we deal with urban congestion issues. And the question becomes, how do we maximize the use of our parking rides? What I am seeing, having said that, with this long history of discussion about a P3 in Washington, what I'm seeing is more and more interest generated by our legislature. I've had several conversations with our legislature and have garnered more and more interest in the feasibility of P3s. What you're looking at on this slide are two projects of a number of projects that our legislature asked us to go and take a look at the feasibility of possibly being innovative in using the public-private partnership model. On the left, you see the Kingsgate Park and Ride. Why this is unique is that, again, it's in the Seattle metropolitan area. It currently has about 502 parking spaces. On any given day, when you go to that park and ride, there could be at most 700 cars. So we've allotted for 502. Where do you put the other 198 becomes the question. And that grass that you see in the forefront of that picture is not an authorized option, but it does become an option. What we're looking at is, could a state DOT overcome a lot of the challenges to developing a transit-oriented development on this site, where we would add, grow the capacity by adding an additional 400 parking spaces, building a mixed-use structure that could have affordable housing, could have commercial retail space, generates revenues, generates an economic development within the city of Kirkland from this transit-oriented development. On the right-hand side is the Coleman Dock ferry terminal. So the Coleman Dock is one of the busiest ferry terminals, again, in North America. We see about 9 million people traversing through the terminal on an annual basis. It's a dilapidated facility. It is not seismically safe, so it is being reconstructed. In authorizing the budget to reconstruct this terminal, the legislature short-funded a small but important component of the project, and that's the entry building, where people actually come through the front door or exit out. We've been asked to look at that project and see if a P3, excuse me, if a P3 could help in delivering this project. Some of the unique facets of this are surrounding the Coleman Dock area are other assets that the DOT owns, and we've been asked to look at, could these assets be used to be leveraged to recapitalize the unfunded portion of the terminal project, and not only recapitalize just that portion, but this is in a high real estate valued area. It's on waterfront. Could we also subsidize or fund the development of a park, hotels, restaurants, things of that nature? So this is where the conversation in Washington has progressed somewhat uniquely in now the legislature considering what other benefits do P3s provide other than just the delivery of a toll road. So looking at the slide, transportation partnerships can take many forms, and I don't want to neglect the bullets that are on the slide. I won't read them all in detail, but it does provide you new contracting methods. It is an alternative financing method that can provide additional funding for your infrastructure project. And if you really think creatively, it provides you with a newer, innovative way to advance your projects. With that, I want to get us into the actual state projects that are the substance of today's presentation. Turn it over to Gregory Loesch from the Michigan Department of Transportation and his freeway lighting project. Gregory.
Thank you, Anthony. As the slide says, my name is Greg Loesch. I am the Innovative Contracting Manager at the Michigan Department of Transportation. I'm going to briefly talk over some points regarding our freeway lighting project. Next slide, please. Okay, so our freeway lighting P3 project is a project that was put together to address freeway lighting in the Metro Detroit area, and its goal was to enhance the freeway lighting throughout the city limits and around some surrounding areas, and improve illumination to the traveling public. The project itself was put together to basically get a project company, private money involved in survey, design, financing, operating, and maintaining the corridors that were included in the project for a term of approximately 15 years, with 2 years of construction and 13 years of operating and maintaining. And this basically means the project company was responsible for replacing high pressure sodium fixtures with LEDs, repairing the existing or replacing the existing system with new foundations, bolts, repairing damaged circuits, pretty much anything you can imagine to get our old system up to a good operational place. Next slide, please. So this slide here discusses the cost and payment structure. So along the right-hand side there, you'll see a table that breaks down the cost of our project. So our project was $145 million, and the table kind of breaks out that includes about $77 million worth of capital improvement, includes the power and operating and maintaining for the term of the project. The capital improvement section of that table does include some FHWA or federal funding participation, and is all covered in a separate agreement that we have for project-specific agreement we have with FHWA for this project. To get to this point, so that we knew this was the project, or this type of delivery method was what we wanted for this project, we ran through quite a few different comparisons of different scenarios. And I have two on the slide that I just kind of want to, they're easy for me to kind of explain, but there are a lot more that were involved with this process. And right now, the first bullet there talks about the status quo. So basically, our internal MDOT forces taking care of our own infrastructure to improve it or just maintain it for the same period of time. We were talking at a cost of around $140 million. So you can see that cost comparison there was 145 versus 140, and the problem was we didn't have the resources to take care of that over the next 15 years. Another scenario was where we would actually be able to get our current system, which was all high pressure sodium lights, up to 100% operating over that same time frame, and we're still talking $183 million just to use our in-house folks as the status quo, maintaining our own system. So once we decided to go down the road of P3 and we got the contract in place, the payment structure is listed there. Basically, we had some milestone payments, which allowed us to pay approximately $12 million of that 145 during the life of the actual construction phase of the contract. And then once we reached a substantial and final completion, we move into a time frame where for the next 13 years, we'll be making quarterly service payments of approximately $2 million a quarter. And that does not include power, but the provisions in the contract that we included also had basically incentivizations to maximize power usage efficiencies, and also had some maintaining traffic, lane rentals, and other provisions to kind of focus the contractor's response time, so that when we did go out to do the work, they weren't impacting traffic. And then also, we wanted to make sure that they were on top of their game as far as priority. Next slide, please. So why a P3 for this project in Michigan? Well, as the case is across the country, due to funding situations and higher priorities, roadway lighting in our state and in Detroit specifically was not a high priority, and it basically, that's what led to the condition of the existing system. Over the course of the last few years, concerns over public safety and security elevated this to a higher place as the department and as our state was looking at it. So even though the priority had moved up, there were still significant upfront capital costs required to improve the existing system, which basically prevented us from being able to move forward without other major areas in our state going without or suffering. So we were able to use public funds or with private funds to basically move the work forward. So take a longer period that would take us a long time with our own forces and advance that to a shorter time frame. And it was improved in a time frame that we could deal with as far as payment goes. And we could also then schedule those payments much like a house mortgage over the next 13 years. It allowed us to shift the work forward and allow our own internal MDOT staff to stay focused on the other priorities that had already been established. And it allowed us to shift risk that was associated with the project to a project company, such as technology. Throughout the life of this time frame, technology was going to be changing, and the incentives that we had in the project and the provisions that we had in the project allowed the contractor to really kind of keep the door open as to what they were going to use on the project to maximize their efficiencies on power usage, and also use the most technically advanced, efficient equipment and other infrastructure components. It also allowed us to shift the risk of theft and vehicular damage to the project company, which had been a large issue when MDOT was taking care of this area in the past. And it allowed basically for any time a pole is knocked down or a light wire stolen, there's a time frame for the contractor to go out there and fix it. Next slide, please. So developing the project originally began as a smaller project to upgrade tunnel and improve tunnel lighting throughout Detroit. And when we started looking at it and we did some initial screening and some market studies, and we found that, even with the smaller projects, it was still going to take a long time to do this work. When we started engaging our industry here in Michigan, and a lot of feedback that we received indicated that they were more interested in a larger project versus a bunch of smaller ones. So we put out letters of interest, took in that information, and decided to go this route. And the procurement process we used a qualification shortlisting process. And then once we shortlisted our contractors, we were able to meet one-on-one with them, go over the information that we had, and we basically moved through the process to get them on board and get going, something that I think was very beneficial. Next slide, please. So project status. Right now, the project is substantially finally complete 2 different milestones within the contract. We reached our substantial completion in August, and final completion was established just a couple weeks ago. Basically, the entire system is at 100% operating, where previously, the best we could do internally, the status quo was to keep a 70% of our high pressure sodium lights on, which was a huge improvement. Going from 70% to 100% has been huge. Some lessons learned: document and version control. These are very important so that rework is not an issue on the project. There needs to be a way to track what documents are being worked on by who to reduce duplication of efforts. Your RFQ when you go out needs to be extremely clear so that everybody is on the same page as to what your department or your agency is looking for. You got to be able to basically focus in on what you can't live with and have that in there, and then everything else could be on the table when you get to the table with your project company. And then also just having reports regarding project status and different deliverables along the project, having those at hand or having a way to compile that information quickly when your upper management needs it is going to be important as well. So that way when legislature calls or there's another inquiry, you can respond quickly. Next slide, please. Okay, that concludes my presentation. I would like to hand over the presentation to Joe Drinkel, Deputy Director of Public-Private Transportation Partnerships in PennDOT for his compressed natural gas fueling stations.
Thank you, Greg. Before I get into the details of the CNG project, I want to set the stage that was existent here in Pennsylvania to get us to that. Next slide, please. Pennsylvania's P3 enabling legislation was passed in 2012. The leadership wanted a big splash project delivered quickly, and the state's Rapid Bridge Replacement Project fit that bill. That project replaces 558 structurally deficient bridges over a 4-year period at a cost of $900 million. The project was in addition to the state's regular bridge repair efforts, and obviously it was a pretty large P3. The second project out the door came from PennDOT's multimodal transportation section, and again was statewide in scope. That's important to the leadership because they wanted to show that P3 projects weren't seen as strictly urban area projects. And if you look at the distribution of the bridges on the map on the right, you'll see that that definitely was not the case in the Rapid Bridge Replacement Project either. The CNG project looked to build fueling station infrastructure needed to support the conversion of most of the state's transit buses from diesel to CNG. And frankly, it was another bundling project where the P3 office could already start to apply lessons learned from the Rapid Bridge Replacement Bundling Project. Next slide. There were a few reasons why the idea was attractive to pursue. First of all, natural gas is readily available in Pennsylvania. It burns cleaner and is much more stable in price. The price stability is an obvious benefit to the transit authorities, and since PennDOT contributes to the budgets, the state as well. The potential for P3 procurement was obvious because we were taking advantage of economies of scale. Stations could be built faster and cheaper if procured in a statewide package. So the main questions that came up during the development of the project were, how are risks going to be shared and how does the project get funded? Next slide. The development entity absorbed most of the risk for this project. The development entity is responsible for design and building 29 fueling stations, including any building modifications that are needed. And then after the stations are built and open, the operation and maintenance of the stations over a 20-year period after the first station opens, so until 2037 as it works out. No small part of this was the development entity was responsible for obtaining permits and approvals. That's not necessarily an easy thing in Pennsylvania because they would have to address subdivision and land development ordinances, which are controlled by municipal governments, of which there are more than 2,500 across the state. The development entity would get milestone payments as stations are opened and infrastructure payments during the operation and maintenance phase. They would also retain a portion of the price for each gallon sold, and 6 of the 29 stations would be open to the public. So as the stations are being built, 6 will have public fueling spots. The state, or the funding for this project was 100% state, and Trillium CNG out of Houston, Texas was chosen as a development entity. Next slide, please. As far as public roles and responsibilities, the transit authorities could opt in. They all had the choice to opt in. Buses were being purchased by PennDOT at no cost to the transit authority, so it was, I don't think it was a hard decision for a fair amount of the authorities. And also the potential fuel savings was a major plus for their operational budgets. PennDOT benefits also include cheaper fuel costs, and they'd also get royalty payments from the development entity on a per gallon of gas purchase. This money would go toward basically answering what's next. So when 2037 rolls around, if the state decides to continue to be invested on the CNG side, they could do that. But if there's a new technology, which is probable in between now and then, this money could be used to help figure out where the state's going from that point. Next slide, please. This is another project with statewide impact. It's estimated that at completion, 1,600 buses total will be CNG fueled. We have systems that opted into this process with 10 buses and systems with 200 buses. So there was a wide variety of opt-in as far as that goes. Environmental benefits are obvious. The 20 million pounds of carbon dioxide emissions eliminated each year. An important fact in this is that local contractors are being used. Again, similar to the Rapid Bridge Replacement Project, we're using local labor forces in order to do this work. So that it's a job builder as well. It also increased exposure to a developing market for both Trillium and the consumer. Trillium has chosen the 6 markets where they see the best opportunity for public consumption. So, and they also have the option as they move into the future to convert other of the stations to public if the conditions exist. Next slide, please. A key basis of developing a procurement was a thought that you let the experts handle their areas of expertise. And what I mean by that is building and operating CNG fueling stations is not a core business for PennDOT. So it was important to find a development entity that was well-versed in that, and in that way, the project would benefit because of anticipated innovation and because of economies of scale. The development entity screening criteria is listed here. Of course, things like lowest capital cost for stations and facility improvements is listed. It was also important for the development entity to have experience with transit agencies. We have a wide variety of circumstances in Pennsylvania, and it would really behoove the development entity who had some experience with the variety of circumstances that exist. Next slide, please. This slide shows the status of the 29 stations. 7 are open, including 2 that are open to the public. Over the next over the next year, by the end of 2018, we expect to have another 10 open, which would constitute about 60% of the 29 stations in the first 2 years. And also, of those 17 completed, all 6 of the public fueling stations would be open. As I mentioned, Trillium is responsible for operation and maintenance through April of 2037. And at that time, there will be a decision made as to how the handback, there'll be a handback plan in place to figure out how to move forward. That concludes my presentation. I'll now turn it over to Tonya Buell from Washington State Department of Transportation, who will present the electric vehicle charging station.
Great, thank you so much, Joe. Again, my name is Tonya Buell, and I'm the project manager for the electric vehicle charging network along our highway corridors in Washington State. And just to give you a little background, compared to CNG fueling and fueling at a gas station, charging an electric vehicle is different, and it's got a different business model. One major difference is the range. Electric vehicles need to be recharged more often, depending on their battery size. And such as the early Nissan Leaf needed to get recharged every 60 miles or so. And now some of the newer electric vehicles, like the Chevy Bolt EV, can go more than 200 miles before depleting the battery. And one of the advantages of electric vehicles is that people can charge them just about anywhere. And they do. About 85% of electric vehicle charging takes place at home at night in the home garage, and drivers can also charge up at work and in public places, such as topping off when they're at their local grocery store. So it's different than a gas station. So the project that I work on is to help people make longer commutes and road trips. EV drivers need faster charging, and that's where the highway charging comes in. We put charging near highway exits about 40 miles apart along our highway corridors. That way drivers can charge up and get back on the highway. And these are typically located on private property at retail locations like shopping malls and outlet shops and restaurants and fueling stations. And they're places, although it's called fast charging, it actually takes about 30 to 45 minutes to charge up. So places, private retail places where people are going to want to spend some time. So the goal of our project really is to increase the purchase and use of electric vehicles. So our goal for the state is to have 50,000 by 2020. We're about halfway there. Fortunately, Washington State is number 3 in the nation in total sales and number 2 as far as market share or percentage of people buying electric cars out of the new cars that are being purchased. And part of that is because there are many, many factors, but one is that people have confidence they can find charging. So we initially put in West Coast Electric Highway stations back in 2012 along our Highway 5 corridor, our north-south corridor, and some other charging a little bit going east-west, but there are a lot of gaps. And the state is working to figure out how to fill those gaps. And so that's why we got into this public-private partnership approach. We really want to foster private sector commercialization of these publicly available charging stations, expand the role of the private sector investment in EV charging throughout the state. And right now it's currently challenging to construct a profitable business case because of the high initial investment cost, the low demand, and then the commercial charging competing with home charging. These charging stations cost about $100,000 per location just to get them installed with the equipment and electrical upgrades. And our legislature did a study that showed that a private developer could actually have a loss per station of $44,000 over 10 years. And so we wanted to figure out how we can incentivize the private sector to put these charging stations in. So the state came up with something creative where electric vehicle drivers pay an annual $150 electric vehicle registration fee, and we take a portion of that and put it in an account, and we use that to bundle charging station installations, so we get economies of scale, so we don't have stranded assets by doing 1 or 2 here or there, and to provide seamless travel along the corridor. And so we really work to leverage every $50 that comes in from EV drivers to put towards this. And you can see on the map locations where we have charging already and locations that we are funding in conjunction with public and private partners. Next slide, please. Okay, there we go. And so WashDOT's program provides grants to government agencies and nonprofits, and those grant recipients are required to have at least 1 private partner. Next slide, please. We did a lot of public outreach to get feedback on how to run the program, how to bundle the projects and get the maximum investment that we could. So we met with all kinds of partners, which include tribes, transit agencies, cities, counties, EV drivers, utilities, and came up with the priority corridors and rules for implementing this project. And like I mentioned before, we didn't want just to fund individual stations. We really wanted a corridor approach where there were at least 3 charging locations along a corridor, and being able to serve just about any kind of electric vehicle charging standard. And so we developed the application and evaluation criteria, and it was heavily focused on private sector investment. The awards were highly favorable to those that had the most private sector match. Next slide, please. And so we recently awarded our $1 million for the first round of this funding, and that actually is getting us $2.5 million in total value. We've got 2 major recipients. One is Energy Northwest, which is a group of electric utilities, public utility districts, about 7 different utilities, along with private sector electric vehicle supply equipment companies, with cities, economic development organizations. There are dozens of partners, and with that, we'll be covering 3 highways and getting 9 different charging stations in eastern Washington, the eastern part of our state. And so that's going to open up the roadway for people that right now can't drive long distances in their electric vehicle in that part of the state where there's nothing there now. And then the other project is along our I-5 corridor with a nonprofit that is working with several businesses along the route, including a couple of museums, other retailers like Walmart, and that is going to really bolster the existing network that we have, and it's going to add another standard, fast charging standard. So we're really excited about this, and just by going through this procurement and getting applications for different corridors throughout the state, such as along our coastline and in the northern part of the state, we now have proposals where communities have come together and developed their plans for electric vehicle charging. And there are other funding sources out there, such as through Electrify America, through the state's part of the Volkswagen mitigation settlement, and there are other projects going on. So we're really working in coordination with all of our public and private partners throughout the state to make sure we're not duplicating efforts and to really stretch the funds to cover as much as the state as possible. So this first round is underway and will be completed in about 1.5 years. And next slide, please. And this slide shows what a successful pilot would look like. We want to make sure that we're really encouraging EV charging and EV purchases. Right now, we're about halfway to our goal of 50,000 EVs. We want to make sure electric vehicle drivers can get where they need to go. And we'll know we're successful if our legislature continues to fund this program. And we are going to be, this program will evolve as we go, as there are faster charging standards and more electric vehicles on the road. So that is it for my presentation. I'm going to hand this back over to Anthony Buckley, who will share some of the common themes that you've heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. That was great. So there you have it. 3 P3 projects representing what can be done when you get innovative and creative. You've got Michigan DOT at $145 million on an LED lighting retrofit in the city of Detroit. Number of small individual lighting projects bundled up into one big contract. The CNG project that carried out by PennDOT, and Washington's investment of $1 million to catalyze greater investments by the private sector in our EV charging infrastructure. Why this focus on the word small? Well, typically in the P3 world, small means it just doesn't pencil out. Small projects typically don't get contracted under P3s. The appetite has been for much more large-scale, 300 million plus type projects. But what we've evidenced to you with these examples today are you can certainly reach that scale by being creative and looking around the landscape and bundling up very light projects. The common themes that you should come away with, that hopefully you've come away with today, are a P3, under a P3, the public policy objectives. I'm sorry, next slide, please, so audience can follow along. Thank you. Again, the common themes, the public policy objectives and the rationale for the private sector's involvement in these programs need to be, they were clearly stated and understood. Communication in a public-private partnership, or getting to execute the public-private partnership, are critical. You have a lot of misperception of what a P3 is out there today. The second point, the financial focus is on enhancing the potential impact of available public funding in these projects. It's not necessarily minimizing public investment or maximizing private financing. A key piece here is P3s do not mean free money. A public-private partnership does not bring free money to the table. A public-private partnerships gives you the ability to deliver and fund or finance a project. The public sponsor has, in each one of the projects that you heard about, has extensive or had extensive interaction with their potential private partners and project stakeholders before they actually finalize the project scope and did the risk allocation provisions in developing the request for proposals. The contracts for operating and maintaining the bundled assets can be relatively short, sometimes 15 to 20 years versus the 40 to 50 years for major highway projects. There is explicit risk transfer provisions and performance agreements underlying each one of these projects. P3s are complex. That goes back to that communications piece. Communications makes it easy. Keeping everyone informed helps navigate that complex roadmap of getting to a successful P3 at the end of the day. Again, the last point here with the common themes, the initial pilot programs can be duplicated or scaled, and the lessons learned can be applied to other assets throughout the DOT's portfolio of assets. So with that, hopefully this has been of value to you, and I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Well, that concludes today's formal presentation, and we now like to open up the webinar to your questions. Next slide. All of today's speakers are currently on the line for today's Q&A. Please type your questions into the questions box in the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll read the questions to our panelists who will answer them. So the first question is to all of today's panelists. How has your agency or project's approach to P3s changed over time?
So Jennifer, this is Anthony. I guess I can tee off with the first answer. I've been with Washington State DOT for approximately 2 years now. My predecessor, who remains a great mentor and coach to me, I've learned from his experience, and Tonya has also been here for a while. The conversation is changing. We have statutory authorization on our books that do allow us to do P3s, and it's been in place since 2005. The state has never executed a P3. We actually lovingly refer to our process as the 6 trap doors to no. over the past 2, maybe even 3, maybe 4 years, our legislature has started warming up to what the potential benefits of a P3 could mean to delivering transportation projects, and not just tolling projects. We do still deal with mentalities that as soon as you say P3, the toll flag goes up.
Thanks. Anyone else on the line like to take a shot at that question?
I can say for,
Sure.
for the state of Michigan, P3s are not a delivery method we have used historically very often. And the P3 lighting project has probably been our most high profile that we've had to date. And the lessons learned that we've been able to capture and analyze are being used as we move forward as possible ways to address future projects that we're hoping to go down the same road with.
From Pennsylvania's perspective, we've certainly had our share of lessons learned along the way, but there have been a lot of very positive things to come out of our few projects that we've started to this point. I'm closely involved in trying to develop where this program goes next, and the opportunities seem endless to me, to be quite honest. And I think it's important that people who are considering P3s recognize that it's not a funding source. It is a procurement strategy, but we see a wide variety of opportunities, both large and small, that this state can move in the direction of if they're so interested.
And this is Tonya. You've already heard from Anthony about Washington's overall approach. I just wanted to mention that as far as the electric vehicle charging, our original West Coast Electric Highway network of charging back in 2011, 2012, we actually had some Federal Recovery Act funding to install electric vehicle charging. And at that time, we worked directly with the private sector through a request for qualifications and quotes with a heavy emphasis on the contributions from the private sector organization. So at that point, we had $1 million and were able to get $600,000 in contributions from the private sector partners. So really making sure that the private sector had skin in the game as well. And now we've moved to more of a community-based public-private partnerships where there's a lot of involvement from the local community. For example, where we've put in charging on some of our east-west routes, just putting in the fast charging has helped catalyze the market where the community gets behind the tourism and economic development benefits of having charging, where local businesses have actually put in their own charging and the corridor, all along the corridor, to really promote the tourism, the EV-friendly routes to tourist locations. So it's been more of a community-based, and that seems to be even catalyzing the market even more and leveraging the funding more with additional partners that know their local areas.
Great. Thanks so much, Tonya. So a running theme of this webinar has been bundling smaller projects into public-private partnership arrangements. And there's a question about whether or not this is the best way to get into the P3 space. If our panelists could speak to this.
This is Joe Jarinko. In our rapid bridge replacement project, like I said, it's a $900 million project. One of the real benefits from that was a county in Pennsylvania took that project and right-sized it for their experience. So instead of 558 bridges, they're using P3 to repair 34 bridges. And I think it definitely points to the fact that it's scalable. We're looking at projects, we're considering projects right now. One is a $3 million project. So I think it's probably a good idea to start with a smaller project that you can wrap your arms around and then build from there on lessons learned.
This is Anthony. I would agree with Joe's comments. Starting smaller with small scale type projects is probably the best way, depending on where your institution, your state, your residents are in their thoughts about P3. Smaller the small steps are the best approach.
Okay, great. Thank you. Joe, this question is for you. Is there language within your P3 agreement regarding the sales price of the fuel to either the public sector, private sector, or both?
Not that I'm aware of. I believe that's set depending on the local circumstances, but I will check on that and make sure that is correct. Okay, thank you very much. And then another follow-up question for you, Joe. Has there been any discussion around the concessionaire receiving any sort of advantage as compared to other CNG retail locations as a result of the partnership? No, there has not been. It's an open market. Certainly Trillium will have the advantage of exposure. And they will have 6 fueling stations that they will have built as a result of this project, but that is not, it doesn't preclude any other supplier from providing fueling stations. Great, thank you very much. Okay. Next question, did your agency have, this is a question for all of the panelists, did your agency have sufficient internal resources and expertise to implement the projects, or did you have to rely on outside consultants? Again, this is Joe. We definitely rely on an outside consultant team. We have technical consultants, we have financial consultants, and we have communication consultants on board. So to complement the in-house expertise. So in the case of the CNG project, again, we're not experts at building fueling stations, but our Bureau of Public Transit worked to pull this project together because of the impact to the transit authorities.
This is Greg. In Michigan, I would basically mirror the same response. We had a complete team from both within our state agency, as well as we relied on technical experts that we brought in from the consulting side of things.
And in Washington State, the State Department of Transportation has just a wealth of experts in all different areas. And typically in our small innovative partnerships office, we work with all different divisions throughout the agency, including our communications office and our technical experts from around the state. And with our we also work closely with our regions, especially when we're out in different parts of the state. But within DOT, we have excellent expertise.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question is about the benefits of using public-private partnerships for rural projects. So, Joe, perhaps you could start us off here.
Many is a simple answer. Again, the leadership in Pennsylvania wanted to make sure that this wasn't seen as an urban area only benefit, and the fact that we were able to get projects together that included, I mean, frankly, the Rapid Bridge Replacement Project almost is exclusively rural based, and these are bridges that, left to the typical PennDOT program resources, probably would not have been done in 10 to 15 years. So here you have a case of acceleration of delivery, and the motorists get to use these bridges now, even though we'll be, you know, they'll be maintained until through 25 years from now. They're available and service now. So, and the fact that the other big thing is local labor. So that is, you know, we saw that as a real plus on the P3 side, and this was not a case where we were bringing in a huge conglomerate that was, you know, out of state or out of country. The leaders were very clear that they wanted to see this impact local labor, and it has.
And this is Tonya. As far as the electric vehicle infrastructure, our partners in Eastern Washington, which is a more rural part of our state, have said that without this state funding and support, they would not be able to put in electric vehicle charging. So this made it possible, especially because the business case is even more challenging in rural areas where there aren't as many vehicles. So with our one project, we were able to serve both urban areas and rural areas, all with the same concept.
And this is Anthony. I'll chime in here, just from the P3 perspective, recognizing that in rural areas it is a challenge for P3, and that is really rooted in the fact that we historically have equated P3 to a toll project, and you can't charge cows going across the field or walking down the highway a toll. What I would suggest is that people, when they think about rural areas in P3, really look to what's known as the social infrastructure, facilities and buildings. Again, in Washington State, we run a large ferry system, and many of our terminals are out in the outer islands in what would be considered rural areas. So we are contemplating how to restructure some of those facilities using a P3, what revenues can be generated to support that ongoing P3 contract. You know, is it in a small town, is it a supermarket who is the leasing of the space? Is it a farmer's market? What other activities will generate long-term revenues is the key there.
Okay, and final question, have any of your agencies established a process for initiating and evaluating other bundling opportunities?
This is Joe. As I mentioned, I'm involved in, as we move forward in what we're calling a screening form. So we're trying to get a handle on what types of projects the leadership wants to pursue, and then what we want to do is to basically go out to the PennDOT district offices and the planning partners across the state and market the fact that we're looking to do these types of projects. Again, no additional funding available, but we believe we can get more projects out at a cheaper cost and have a bigger impact on our normal transportation program by choosing appropriate P3 procurement.